Welcome to today's edition of the Rush 24/7 podcast.
And a quick question here, ladies and gentlemen, right to you from the EIB network. Should a Democrat, any Democrat, now praise President Trump's good judgment for bashing the House Freedom Caucus? Should that happen? Because that's what President Trump has done. President Trump and Paul Ryan have gone public with their fight against the Freedom Caucus. I was telling Mr. Snerdley mere moments ago, I know I predicted this. I know I did. It was last week. It had to be a week ago today or maybe a week ago tomorrow. But I warned everybody when this bill went down the tubes. It was the bill didn't go down the tubes while we were on the air. It went down the tubes on a Friday, about a half hour after the program. A week ago tomorrow, it went down the tubes. But I remember it was last Thursday or Friday. It probably was last Friday. I warned everybody that where this was going to lead was Trump seeking out the Democrats. If Trump couldn't get what he wanted with the Republicans, I know I did because I was talking about this. In the Democrats, we have two factions. We have the whole caucus and the Congressional Black Caucasians, and that's it. On the Republican side, we have the whole House caucus, but then we've got the Tuesday group, the Wednesday morning group, the Thursday night group, the Freedom Caucus. We got all these disparate groups in there, and very rarely are they unified. The Democrats are unified because Congressional Black Caucasians go along with whatever the majority of the House wants. I mean, it's very rare that the Congressional Black Caucasians oppose the Democrat leadership. And I pointed out, if Trump wants to get things done, and it's the Republicans, whoever it is, the Freedom Caucus, the Wednesday group, the Thursday group, if they are perceived to be the reasons that his agenda is stalled, he's going to turn to the Democrats. I know I warned people about this. Anyway, greetings, folks. Great to have you here. And now that's what he's saying he's going to do. And the New York Times is all happy. The New York Times saying he should do it. He should go work with the Democrats. And Paul Ryan says, I don't think he should work with the Democrats. But the New York Times, I think he should work with the Democrats. Paul Ryan, I don't think so. Where was I? Oh, yeah, 282-2882. I had to finish giving you the phone. 800-282-2882. Well, right here it is. Trump says we must fight hardline conservative Freedom Caucus in 2018 midterm elections. You know what this means? It means Trump is going to put his muscle behind defeating conservatives in the House of Representatives because he believes they betrayed him on the health care bill. And I know that's what the media is writing, and that's what the establishment Republicans believe, because everybody hates the conservatives. But I'm telling you, it was not the conservatives that sandbagged that bill. And I'll tell you something, folks. Forgive me here, but I'm reaching the top limit of my frustration with all of this. Year after year after year, it's tempting, and everybody gets caught up in the analysis and gets caught up in the game. And everybody, and I've done it myself. You take something, anything. This is a generic example. Something happens in the news, start analyzing, what does it mean? And Analyst A says it means this. Analyst B says, well, it could mean that, but it might mean that and this. And then Analyst C, no, you guys know what we should. And everybody gets caught up in what it could mean, what it might mean, what might happen down the road. And in the end result, let's get back to specific health care. We got all this chatter. We had all these people talking about it. All these intentions expressed. All these carrots dangled. Now they're dangling the carrot. Hey, you know what? We're going to revive it. Hey, we're going to bring it back. Yesterday, it was, we're going to bring it back soon. We might bring it back next week. Today, Paul Ryan said, sorry, no timeline for bringing it back. It's obvious they want the PR from saying they're going to bring it back. But what is the truth day in and day out? There isn't any reform. There isn't any repeal of Obamacare. All this chatter and all this analysis, which is designed to make people in the media look brilliant and smart and insightful, doesn't change anything. The end of yesterday, Obamacare was still a law of the land. At the end of today, it's still going to be the law of the land. At the end of tomorrow, still going to be the law of the land. When Trump gets together with the Chi-Com president, Mar-a-Lago, next week, it's still going to be the law of the land. But yet everybody's going to be getting excited, chatting about it, analyzing it, forecasting it, predicting it. and so forth. And it's easy to get caught up in the game. I mean, it's where people make their bones. It's where people make their reputations. I'm a superior political analyst. I've been quoted countless times on Fox News. I'm just this close to getting a book deal, and then my career will be made. Well, how did you do all that? Well, I give people the possibilities. I'm an excellent analyst of what's happening in the political scene. What is there to analyze? Other than to assign blame. For 7 years, Philip Klein in the Washington, you know who Philip Klein is? Well, he's Philip Klein, and he has a piece in the Washington Examiner. And you know what he wrote about this healthcare blow-up? He said, this is the biggest, without question, broken promise in the history of United States politics and maybe even world politics. The biggest promise ever broken. 7 years of assurances. 7 years of campaigning. 7 years of commitments. 7 years of people voting. Well, not that many years, but election after election where Republicans were elected because of what they said they were going to do. And then it was time for the rubber to hit the road. Nobody even had a plan. And the people out selling the plan couldn't even tell you what was in it because they didn't know. In many cases. Washington Post. Trump says we must fight hardline conservative Freedom Caucus in 2018 midterm elections. It's by Philip Rucker. Basically, President Trump effectively declared war today on the House Freedom Caucus, the powerful group of hardline conservative Republicans who blocked the health care bill, vowing to fight them, Trump did, in the 2018 midterm election. Let me tell you something else about this. Don't doubt me. Your hardcore average Trump voter isn't going to care about this. I had it said to me this morning, Trump's making a grave tactical error if he does this. Whoever's advising him to do this is a huge mistake. No, it's not. Trump voters are wedded to Trump. A big percentage of them. If this is what their man has to do to get things done, then this is what their man has to do to get things done. Let me ask Mr. Snerdley, is an insightful political analysis, loves to analysts play the game. Do you think Trump will hurt himself with this? I'm not so sure, but we can't know that until the next election. In a morning tweet today, Trump warned that the Freedom Caucus would hurt the entire Republican agenda if they don't get on the team and fast. He grouped its members, the Freedom Caucus, all of them Republicans, with Democrats in calling for their political defeat, an extraordinary incitement of intra-party combat from a sitting president. There are 32 members of the Freedom Caucus. Most of them were elected or re-elected comfortably in solidly Republican districts. With his tweet, Trump seemed to be encouraging primary challenges to each of them in next year's elections. Now, the media can't get its tongue off the sidewalk here. This may be one of the quickest 180-degree turns from hate to love that we will witness. Now that Trump is reaching out to the Democrats, well, now that Trump is savaging the conservative Freedom Caucus, the media is, well, they've got to praise it. I told you what's going to happen. Trump's going to be praised. He's going to be celebrated as having grown in office. And I'll tell you who's going to get the credit. Jared Kushner and Ivanka and Dina Powell, Goldman Sachs. Dina Powell worked with Gary Cohn at Goldman Sachs. Dina Powell has a puff piece today at thehill.com. Thehill.com, which hates Trump. Thehill.com, which despises Republicans. There are a couple of writers there that don't, but I mean the general editorial position is. But there's a puff piece on Dina Powell. You ever heard of Dina Powell? You might have, depending on how deeply she's a former Goldman Sachs. She ran a foundation at Goldman Sachs. She wasn't a trader. She wasn't a money babe. Gary Cohn, C-O-H-N, was a trader at Goldman Sachs. He is hard left Democrat. People have been wondering how did he end up there in the Trump administration as advisor. Dina Powell is his loyal lieutenant. She's got a puff piece today on how she is a moderating influence, and how everyone likes her and how everyone admires her. Are you surprised that, you would never see a puff piece like this about Bannon. You would never see a puff piece like this about Priebus. You wouldn't see a puff piece about this, like this about Mick Mulvaney, who is the budget director. But Dina Powell, big puff piece. And so, and there are continuing pieces on Ivanka and Jared Kushner, her husband, as they're becoming the power couple of Washington. Axios, the new website started by the founder of the Politico. Friends who frequently talk to Trump tell us the president will make one big change in response to the health care fiasco. In the constant check-in phone calls for which he's famous, he's going to talk with a wider array of people and include more Democrats in his phone calls. And then the next story. Where do you think this is leading, ladies and gentlemen? New York Times, lead editorial, why Democrats should work with Trump. All of a sudden now, it's okay. The next thing, we're going to see, if this keeps up, it ain't going to be long before there's a New York Times headline urging the House and the Senate investigating committees to drop the investigation into collusion between Trump and the Russians. The New York Times is going to say it's gone on long enough. It is too distracting. After all of this time and after all of this money spent investigating this, if they still haven't found any provable evidence that there was collusion, it's time to drop it. If Trump continues his outreach to Democrats, I'm predicting to you that it won't be long before the drive-by media urges itself and the Senate and the House to suspend the investigation. Now, you may think, Rush, that'll never happen. They're never going to give up on that. Folks, they may have to, because I think this investigation is actually going to ensnare them before it's all said and done. I will get into that as the program unfolds. I sat on this story for 2 days. I'm slapping myself here. What's her name? Evelyn Vargas. Story, is that her name? Farkas. Evelyn Farkas. She went on MSNBC. She was in the Obama administration. And what this woman did was unwittingly out the entire Obama administration's surveillance of the Trump transition team and the Trump campaign. She went on TV and basically admitted it. And she explained how she was behind it. She was involved in it. You might say, how does this happen? It's not hard to figure this out. Where did she do it? She's at MSNBC. Who's at MSNBC? Like-minded fellow leftist travelers. She feels at home. She doesn't have the sense of presence of mind to realize that she's blowing a whistle on something. She's just confirming things among friends. Who can blame her for thinking MSNBC has an audience? So she goes out there and she basically admits everything. She admits that the Obama administration was, in fact, surveilling. I mean, it is blockbuster, so we'll get into that. I sat on this for 2 days, and I'm slapping myself for it. I have my reasons. I didn't trust it at first. That's essentially what it was. This is a powder keg of a story, and I'm sure the long ears and knives are out for anybody who might get anything wrong. So I held off until I could get confirmation of it somewhere else. Even though I saw her on MSNBC saying it, I still thought it better to wait. And so it's percolated and it's broken out there. It's now everywhere. So we'll get into it in great detail here. But back to the New York Times. President Trump has discovered that trying to work with the Republicans is complicated. So with all of his big campaign pledges in limbo following last week's Obamacare fiasco, Trump's reportedly contemplating overtures to a party that actually wants to govern, the Democrats. Now, this is editorial. Can you believe this? Trump is actually, listen to the exact words, he's reportedly contemplating overtures to a party that actually wants to govern, the Democrats. I wouldn't be surprised to see that in a news story as well, but it is in an editorial. Perhaps, writes the New York Times, perhaps it's beginning to dawn on the president that today's Republican Party is designed for maximal obstruction and minimal constructive policymaking. The rigidly doctrinaire Freedom Caucus essentially has veto power over White House initiatives, while moderates will jump ship if Mr. Trump concedes too much to right-wing purists. What's more, Republicans are all over the map on the next big items on Trump's agenda: tax reform and infrastructure. I told you that that's where the Democrats were going to be. So I know I told you this because that was a specific, and I read that they couldn't wait to work with Trump on that. Yeah, even Mr. Snerdley remembers. Tax reform can't do that unless we do health care, and health care is down the tube. So up next is infrastructure, Trump reaching out to the Democrats. They say if Trump could peel off several dozen moderate Democrats in the House and a handful in the Senate, he could neutralize the far right's naysaying and give moderate Republicans a chance to vote for measures with broad bipartisan support. Sad to say this was in the cards. I think the Freedom Caucus getting a very bad rap as being the reason. That bill, folks, there were two ways to look at it. The bill by itself maintained Obamacare aspects. So why vote for it? It maintained Obamacare aspects. In some cases, premiums were going to increase. Why do this? Why put your name to that? Why would any Republican do it? Unless the objective was just get a win. Just say within 60 days we tackled the biggest legislative issue to come down the pike and we got it done. See, we repealed and reformed, except there wasn't going to be any of that. They needed phase 2 and phase 3. Freedom Caucus said there's nothing here. Freedom Caucus said, you know what? The people urging us to vote for this are not even telling us what's in it. They're not selling it to us. They're telling us to vote for it to stick with party unity, to make sure that it looks like the party's united, but nobody's telling us the decent things. So we went in, we got some concessions, we got some things that we wanted in it, but not enough. I think a real analysis of this would show that the greater number of defections was actually going to be among the so-called moderates in the House. But the conservatives are always going to get the blame because the Washington establishment, both parties, despises them. Not news there either. Told you that for years. Probably tired of hearing that by now, but it's true. I take a break here, folks. We'll be back and roll on right after this. Weekly press briefing, Paul Ryan on Capitol Hill saying Trump should not work with the Democrats on health care.
Well, because about 90% of our conference is there. And about 10% are not. So that's why I say we're close, because we are. Here's the point I'm making here. The Democrats aren't for repealing Obamacare. We are. We work with Democrats all the time. So we have long histories of working with Democrats. But I don't think it's a stretch of the mind to suggest that the Democrats disagree with us on repealing Obamacare. They're not going to help us repeal Obamacare. That's my point. And so if we're going to do what we said we would do, which is repeal and replace Obamacare and save the American healthcare system, something tells me the Democrats aren't going to help us repeal Obamacare. They're the ones who created it in the first place.
Right. That's absolutely true. And remember, Trump is not ideological. He's not seeing the Freedom Caucus. What he sees is a bunch of guys that voted against him. We'll be back. Greetings, welcome back. It's great to have you here. Rush Limbaugh executing assigned host duties flawlessly. That's zero mistakes. That's because I assign them. 800-282-2882. There's another thing about this threat to the Freedom Caucus in terms of Trump's tweet today. You have to look at it as a threat. He's not yet abandoned them. But clearly, if you go look at this, Trump said that Freedom Caucus would, quote, hurt the entire Republican agenda if they don't get on the team and fast. Now, two things about this. For all of you who think that Paul Ryan is the problem in the House, Trump here is siding with him. Number one. That's what this tweet means. So the health care bill going down the tubes, Trump is not blaming Ryan for it. He's clearly blaming the Freedom Caucus. But he's not abandoning them yet. If we interpret the tweet correctly, he said, if they don't get on the team and fast. Well, I'm assuming that that means in the next piece of legislation, if whatever it is, if it's the revival of Obamacare, the repeal and replace effort, if it is tax reform, it is infrastructure. If the Freedom Caucus doesn't get on board, then Trump is going to try to take them out in 2018. I look at it as Trump giving them one more chance here. But in the final analysis, it means that Trump is siding with Ryan here, not with Ryan in any way other than the health care bill being defeated. Trump is not holding Ryan in any way, shape, manner, form responsible. I know many of you do, but this means that Trump isn't. You also have to keep in mind Trump is not ideological. I have made this point over and over. He knows what conservative policies, he knows what liberalism is, but he doesn't see people that way. It's a big difference. You look at Chuck Schumer's opposition to Gorsuch. Trump doesn't chalk it up to the fact that Schumer is a liberal. He chalks it up to the fact that Schumer is, a de facto ill body part, or he's a weird guy, just mean guy, or wrong, or whatever. But Trump is typical of many Americans. They don't think ideologically. They don't analyze ideologically. They don't even know ideology. And to these people, you start talking liberalism and conservatism, you lose them. About as far as they go as Republican versus Democrat, but conservative, liberal, it just, sadly, that is the case. I wish it were otherwise. So these guys, the Freedom Caucus, I mean, Trump's a media creature. The Freedom Caucus has been blamed. Know how you can escape that. Trump sees these guys as people who opposed him. He's a Republican president. He's largely responsible in his mind for their having acquired power, and they're opposing him. He doesn't see them as a bunch of conservatives who have to be sworn. Now, he's got people in his regime who know that too. Don't misunderstand. I'm talking about Trump himself. And it's also possible that Trump is becoming more sensitive or attuned to ideology than he was and always has been as a private citizen. I'm just telling you, everybody has their own makeup, their own personality and political makeup. And Trump has not been somebody who decides on policy based on the ideological aspect or component of it. I'll give you an example of the branding on this. One of the places that I play golf, when we all gather there, and this group I know is made of people who always vote Republican. Many of them do not like conservatives because their wives have nagged them on abortion. Look, it is what it is. They have a misunderstanding of it, even though they live their lives this way. Even when you listen to them talk, you would swear they're conservative, but you call them that, and they say, no, 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 no. All right, now you take 10 of us sitting around a table having breakfast before we go out to the range, and a dyed-in-the-wool movement conservative will sit down at the table and start talking about whatever the latest news is in dyed-in-the-wool conservative terms. And half of the group of 10 will get up and leave. Don't want to hear it. Think the guy's a kook. Think the guy's a literal kook. And all he's doing is talking conservatism, traditional American values. They think he's a kook. These are people that I'm talking. They don't see things ideologically. And in fact, these people, when you do get to ideology, they kind of get nervous and back off. They don't want anybody to think that they're conservative. They're happy to be considered Republicans. And I sent a little tweak note, like we're going to play golf, let me make something else, play golf a couple weeks from now. And the incident that I just described, by the way, did happen. So I'll send a note out to the guys. Okay, I'll set us up for X such and such a club. I'll make sure that we don't have any more conservatives interrupt us. And I got 3 responses. Please do. Please make sure. Don't let that happen. As though it's my fault. But the dyed-in-the-wool conservatives sat down at the breakfast and talked to me about it. And the others looked at him like, who opened the gates at the zoo? Well, that's Trump. But it's the same thing with liberals, too. He doesn't, don't misunderstand, he doesn't like Schumer. But the reason he doesn't like Schumer and the reason he sees Schumer as a threat is because Schumer is against him. And that's what he sees in the Freedom Caucus. Now, as I say, he may be growing, learning more, and becoming more understanding of things ideological. Don't know. But it's important to know that he isn't. And he has sided up here. So his opposition to Freedom Caucus is not strictly because they're conservative. It's mostly because he thinks that they voted against him. And if you're not on his team, he's not going to woo you. You either join him or you're out in the cold. Let me go to the phones. One other thing here. We'll get to the Evelyn Farkas. I got to be really careful pronouncing that name. I have to be very deliberate pronouncing that name. I got to make sure I don't get verbal dyslexia or any way tongue-tied pronouncing her last name, Evelyn Farkas. As I say, I sat on that a couple of days because I didn't quite trust the original sourcing. It's my bad. But the same thing holds. Until I've weighed in on it, you don't really know what it means. But there's a story out there today. James Comey, the FBI director, wanted to go public with the Trump-Russia collusion investigation details last summer. Summer and late summer, he wanted to go public with what they were learning and that there was an investigation between Trump or of Trump and the Russians. And you know who kiboshed it? Barack Hussein. I know all of this is supposedly, I think it's a lot of people covering their rear end, and this is what I say. I'm reaching my limit, patience-wise, some of this stuff. And now this is kind of funny because Comey says that he wanted to go public. He was raring and ready to go, and Obama told him no. Obama said, no, because we don't need it, James. We're going to win anyway. We don't need it. Hillary's going to win. We don't need this now. We don't need to gum up the works here. No. Because they thought all summer long they were going to win, and they were going to win big. They didn't need all this kind of stuff. So now, Comey, trying to protect his image, hey, I knew all this way back last summer. I was prepared to go public. What did he go public with? The Hillary investigation. And the way he went public with that, well, you remember that. The learned analysis of that was that Comey wanted to indict her, but that he was frustrated because the Obama DOJ wouldn't go anywhere near there. So what Comey did was go out and in his press conference essentially present the case he had using the public as a jury to affect the outcome of the election. So while Comey was doing great damage to Hillary, we now get a story saying he wanted to go out and do great damage to Trump by revealing what he had learned about Trump's relationship with the Russians during the campaign, and Obama said no. Some of this doesn't add up. It just doesn't add up. Now the Senate's getting in on this. And this is one of the greatest media sleights of hand, one of the greatest media distraction stories I've ever seen. Because there's no there. And yet they're continuing to pursue this. And even, as they update the news, the New York Times, this is an interesting point. The New York, remember that January story, 20th story, where they had wiretaps and intercepts? This is where Evelyn Farkas comes into the picture. They never refer back to that story. In any update they do, they never refer to that story. And that story used wiretaps, the words in the headline, used intercepts. It made it clear that they had all kinds of intelligence people leaking to them that there was really something going on here. And yet, in every story updated since, they don't refer back to that story as evidentiary to add to what they've already. Why are they ignoring that story? Why don't they go back and, I mean, you'd be proud of it, right? The story's right. That story contains all the goods or enough goods to really cast serious doubt. Why wouldn't you continually refer back to it? But they aren't. Okay, we're going to take a break, and we're going to start with Katie in St. Louis, outside St. Louis, and Florissant, Missouri, when we get back. Don't go away. Now, folks, I did not mean to cause any undue concern here. Let me close the loop, dot the I's, and cross the T's. This fantasy of working with the Democrats, and the New York Times clearly is hot and bothered. New York Times they're in, why don't you read this editorial? They're clearly in the advanced stages of foreplay. I mean, they're on the verge. They think that it's going to happen. I'm going to tell you they're going to have a cold shower. Everybody is. This fantasy of working with the Democrats is going to be put to bed on April 7th or whenever the Senate votes on Gorsuch and the Democrats filibuster it. Because I don't care what the Freedom Caucus has done. When it comes down to Gorsuch, the Democrats are not going to vote for the guy. If they have to, they'll filibuster him. The name of the game is resistance. That's how the Democrats keep their donations coming in. It's how the DNC is going to be reconstituted. Resistance, resistance, oppose. Hillary was out there talking about it in San Francisco in the black leather jacket. You think that was an accidental wardrobe choice? Hardly. So Trump's going to get angry all over again at the Democrats when they filibuster Gorsuch. I was watching Lindsey Graham on TV today. Lindsey Graham is a guy, the last thing in the world that he would ever want to do is pull a nuclear option. Preserve the Senate rules. But he was loaded for bear today talking about the Democrats. He said, if they can't vote for Neil Gorsuch, then it's clear there's not a single judge any Republican would ever nominate they would vote for. I'm sitting there saying, are you just now figuring this out? But I'll take it if he's just now figuring it out. So they're going to filibuster Gorsuch. Did you hear what Pelosi said about Gorsuch? I know you guys, I know you get tired of me sometimes being repetitive, but I'm telling you, I only repeat what they say. Did you hear what Pelosi said about Gorsuch? I'm paraphrasing, it's pretty close. If you drink water and breathe air, you need to oppose Neil Gorsuch. I know. The Republicans are blamed for all this pollution out there, and you don't think anybody takes it seriously. The question is, why is Nancy Pelosi not laughed and hooted out of politics with a comment like that? Why does anybody give her any credence whatsoever? And yet the media and Democrat analysts talk about that. She's brilliant. That's a brilliant strategy. To blame the guy for dirty water and dirty air, it's akin to Republicans want to destroy the planet. Why do Republicans want to destroy where they live? But the Democrats live and die with this stuff. She uses it because it still works, is the problem, and it works with the lunatics that send her money and vote for her. Imagine. If you like drinking water, it's not a matter of like, you have to do that. And if you like breathing, Neil Gorsuch is not your judge. As though Gorsuch is going to try to stop you from drinking water and breathing air or poison it, or it's just absurd. Okay, Katie, Florissant, Missouri, outside St. Louis. I'm glad you called. I really appreciate your waiting. What's up?
Hi, Mr. Limbaugh. I just wanted to take a minute to let you know that, as usual, you're right. The media can't do anything to hurt Trump. Only Mr. Trump can hurt himself. And when he bashes the Freedom Caucus, he bashes me. And it makes me consider where we're going next. I feel like the Freedom Caucus was quite honest, and in the right lane when they were saying that this repeal thing that Ryan had isn't any good, and I find that it's unreasonable.
Let me tell you something, Katie. They all knew the bill was bad. They knew it was bad. They wanted it passed anyway. That's why they kept talking phase 2 and phase 3 to fix it. They wanted the win. Everybody involved wanted to be able to say they got it done. And what it was called, repeal and replace, the American Health Care Act, they wanted the win. Phase 2, phase 3, that's where they were going to go fix it. The problem was there wasn't going to be a phase 2 or phase 3.
Right. If you don't get it done now, it's not going to happen. It's just going to be another promise that isn't met.
Well, it would have been worse. It would have sustained Obamacare. If that thing had been implemented and then not amended any further, it would have sustained Obamacare. Too many aspects of Obamacare. What they were counting on was pass the bill and let the Health and Human Services Secretary, Tom Price, go in there and start ripping out all of the regulations that Obama's Health and Human Service secretaries had put in, and that they could neuter it some in that way. But they really wanted it. The Freedom Caucus guys said this bill is not good. It does not do what we're telling the American people it does. We don't want to put our names to it. But I have to repeat what because I did say the media can salivate all day long about destroying Trump, but they can't because they didn't make him. Only Trump can destroy Trump. And that's what she was referring to. So then you need to ask, okay, how many of Trump's voters are, in fact, ardent conservatives and would be bothered by that tweet? The Twitterverse has literally gone crazy after learning how the Pence marriage manifests itself. We'll have details on that. We're going to wade into the Evelyn Farkas story when we get back. Hi, welcome back. Great to have you here, my friends. Rush Limbaugh doing that which I was born to do. One of the greatest good fortunes that ever happened to anybody is being able to do what you were made to do what you were born to do, and doing it on your terms, and that's what success is, if you ask me. 800-282-2882 if you want to be on the program. The email address is lrushbo@eibnet.us. Devin Nunes is refusing to recuse himself from the House Intelligence. There's no way he should. There's no reason. That's not a legal proceeding there. The House Intelligence Committee is not a court of law. It does not have lawyers in this kind. There's no reason for him to recuse himself. And by the way, the stuff that he has learned, the only mistake that he made, if he made a mistake, was in trumpeting the fact that he was alerting Trump to what he'd known. But the executive branch had the details, had the intel that Nunes came across. What Nunes came across was what we all know what happened, and that is that the Obama administration was surveilling foreign actors, and they were unmasking Americans who had been caught up in that surveillance. Americans who were not the targets had what they were saying, in some cases, leaked to the media, and in some cases their names were unmasked. Clear violations of the law. And what he meant by legal, it was legal, is that the wiretaps on the foreign actors, like the Soviet ambassador and anybody else, were totally legal. And those people talked to Americans who were not under surveillance. And that's where the problem comes in. When you unmask Americans not under surveillance and leak what those Americans said when you don't have a wiretap to do so, they're clear violation of law. But the actual collection of the evidence of the surveillance was legal. Anyway, there's no reason for Nunes to recuse himself. The Democrats are playing pure obstructionism here because this is the only thing that they have to try to taint the election and the Trump, actually not the election, of the Trump presidency. Now let's move on here to Evelyn Farkas, a former Obama administration official. She has let the cat out of the bag. And if anybody needs to be called to testify, it's Evelyn Farkas. In case you haven't heard by now, Ms. Evelyn Farkas, you've got to be real careful on radio pronouncing that name. And I'm just exercising extreme caution here. Evelyn Farkas is an Obama Pentagon Russian expert who told Mika Brzezinski on PMSNBC a couple of days ago that the regime, the Obama regime, was indeed collecting intelligence on the Trump campaign. And she said that they were unmasking the Trump people and leaking that info to the media. And that her only concern was that the administration and the Hill, Capitol Hill, would not be able to protect the sources and methods from the Trump people that the Trump people found out. She admitted all of this. She may have outed herself as the source for all of this that ran on CNN and in the New York Times. And it's clear why she did it. She is a tunnel-visioned ideologue. And she went on MSNBC, where she's surrounded in her mind by like-minded people who would have done the same thing had they been her, and who are willing and waiting to applaud her for doing it. She forgot that MSNBC has an audience, and who could blame her for that? It's widely known that MSNBC does not have an audience. So she, for all intents and purposes, thought she was at a bar with some of her friends at like 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning, and that nobody was listening. And she was talking to a bunch of like-minded fellow travelers. She also said that's why it was so important for the intelligence to be widely distributed, as it was. She left the Obama administration, left the Pentagon in September 2015. So let me tell you what that means. Contrary to it meaning that she was out of the loop, it means that this intel collection against the Trump campaign had to be going on from the very earliest days. Remember, Trump's trip down the escalator was in June of 2016, or was it July? June 16th, yeah. That trip down the escalator, June of 2015, and Evelyn Farkas said that the intelligence collection, the surveillance against the Trump campaign, says she left in September 2015 and she knew about it, then it had to be going on in the summer of 2015, which in and of itself is quite amazing. It's earth-shattering. It's blockbuster, given that scarcely anyone gave Trump a chance of getting the nomination. Remember, this is the period of time, Trump's June the 16th announcement, that's where everybody was laughing themselves silly, thinking he couldn't possibly be serious. He's just come out here and basically called every Mexican a rapist and said he doesn't respect McCain because he doesn't like military people that get captured. He doesn't respect all that. This is back in the days when people thought Trump was going to implode and crater with every public appearance. And that went on for 2 or 3 months. They were not taking Trump seriously. That's what's amazing about this. They were still surveilling the guy. Court and his campaign, according to Evelyn Farkas. Now, Comey told us the Russians only wanted to see Hillary get defeated. And that's another thing. How's that intel? But last week at that vaunted Capitol Hill hearing before the House Intelligence Committee, Comey admitted, oh, yeah, the Russians wanted Hillary defeated. So why weren't the Russians colluding with Jeb? I mean, everybody back then thought Jeb was going to be the nominee. Is that not true? Why would anybody be colluding with Trump? Nobody thought Trump was going to win. Probably Trump didn't think he was going to win. Although he says he did, but June, July, August 2015. That's, folks, we're coming up on a year and a half ago now. And at that time, everybody thought it was going to be Jeb. Jeb, with the exclamation point. Everybody thought it was going to be Jeb. Am I right about that? And there was some attention being played to Ted Cruz, but not Trump. So why weren't the Russians trying to engineer some deal with Jeb? Why isn't there any intel on that? Why weren't the Russians trying to strike a deal with Cruz? Why isn't there any intel on that? Why haven't there been any leaks about that? Because nobody in 2015 thought that it was going to be the Trumpster. Let's listen to Evelyn Farkas. We have the audio sound bites here from March. Yeah, but I don't know if that's right. I thought this was much more recent than that. Look, we'll just say recently, and then because she was on Squawk Box today. So here's the first bite. It says March 2nd. It was on MSNBC Morning Joe, and they were discussing allegations that the Obama administration conducting surveillance of the Trump transition team. This is, again, Evelyn Farkas.
I was urging my former colleagues and, frankly speaking, the people on the Hill, it was more actually aimed at telling the Hill people, get as much information as you can, get as much intelligence as you can before President Obama leaves the administration, because I had a fear that somehow that information would disappear with the senior people who left. So it would be hidden away in the bureaucracy, that the Trump folks, if they found out how we knew what we knew about the Trump staff dealing with Russians, that they would try to compromise those sources and methods, meaning we would no longer have access to that intelligence. So I became very worried because not enough was coming out into the open, and I knew that there was more. We have very good intelligence on Russia. So then I had talked to some of my former colleagues, and I knew that they were trying to also help get information to the Hill. That's why you have the leaking.
She admits it. It was right there. She admitted that they were collecting it, preserving it, and then urging people to get it out. In her words, get it to the Hill, meaning Democrats on the Hill, before the Obama administration left. And we've had stories right there in I guess it was the New York Times. Obama ordered people to preserve all the intelligence being gathered, which has led many people, including moi, to ask, what do you mean preserve the intelligence being gathered? I thought there wasn't any intelligence being gathered. I thought Trump was not being surveilled. But of course he was. We've known this from the first story saying whatever it said with the sources being intelligence operatives deep inside the intelligence community. The New York Times with all those stories talking about intercepts, and the one on January 20th talking about wiretaps. Where were they getting all this? Somebody had to be leaking it to them, and somebody had to be collecting it. And this woman, Evelyn Farkas, just copped to it. And you have to ask, does she realize what she's doing? Does she? And clearly, folks, she thought she was with fellow travelers that would be entirely understanding and sympathetic and supportive. She hadn't the slightest compunction about this. I was urging my former colleagues, and frankly, speaking to people on the Hill, it was more actually aimed at telling the Hill people, get as much information as you can, get as much intelligence as you can before Obama leaves, because I had a fear that somehow that information would disappear with the senior people who left, so it would be hidden away in the bureaucracy that the Trump people, if they found out how we knew what we knew about Trump's staff dealing with Russians, they would try to compromise those sources and methods, meaning we would no longer have access to the intelligence. So I became very worried because not enough was coming out into the open, and I knew there was more. We have very good intelligence on Russia. So then I had talked to some of my former colleagues, and I knew that they were trying to get information to the Hill. That's why you have the leaking. This woman needs to be brought up and testify right now. This woman outed herself, and who knows whoever else, admitting that they were surveilling, admitting that they were preserving it, admitting they were afraid that if it wasn't used, that the Trump people would bury it when they were sworn in. So they had to get it out because the intelligence was very good. She was worried because not enough was coming out. She talked to some of her former colleagues, and after that knew that they were trying to also get information to the Hill. That's why you have the leaking. Do you know that this story, Evelyn Farkas' appearance on MSNBC, has yet to be reported on CNN, the New York Times, the Washington Post? It remains an unknown story to Americans who only get their news from the drive-by media. I think we can prove my contention that nobody watches MSNBC because I double-checked here, and Evelyn Farkas did appear on MSNBC on March 2nd or March 3rd. It is March 28th to start going public. So 3 weeks. Obviously, nobody watches MSNBC. If it took 3 weeks for this statement of hers to go public, I mean, if anybody of any substance watches MSNBC, they would have spotted that the moment they heard it. Heck, the MSNBC people didn't even realize what they'd heard. Back to the phones we go. Bailey's Harbor, Wisconsin. Hey, Jim, I'm glad you called. Great to have you here. How you doing?
Hi, Rush. It's a pleasure talking to you. I've been listening to you for a long time, but I have to comment on your mentioning of Trump attacking the Freedom Caucus. I just have this to say, is that a lot of his voters voted for him because there wasn't any choice. It was the rum-dum Republicans or Hillary. So what was left? Donald Trump. So we all jumped on the bandwagon. We think, here's our conservative guy. He's going to lead us out of the woods. Maybe America can get great again. And what is he going to do the first time he gets a big bill? They do a crappy job on it. It turns out nobody likes it. It's bad for America, not great for America. It's kind of like fake health care under Trump. He should thank the conservative caucus for saving his rear end, and he should work with them, not try to take them out instead. It's just a backward step, and he's going to find out it's a step he'll take at his own peril. It's a step one of his return to the, let's call it the right-left previous activity of his political action. He never did know if he was a righty or a lefty, and now it looks like the left version is coming out. If he can't even understand the Freedom Caucus is his ticket to ride to success. I just don't, we want good government. We don't want fake government, and he's got our backing only if he knows how to make America great again.
Did we lose him?
Us
I lost myself. Either my battery's dead or connection's loose.
Option.
Yeah, here, Jim, let me step in here because I know what you're reacting to. I made a statement in the first segment of the program today when talking about how the president says he's going to reach out to the Democrats. He tweeted out that the Freedom Caucus, they better get in gear, or he's going to campaign against them in 2018. Next time they better get in gear, or it's over for them. And I opined at the time that there are some Trump voters who are going to stick with him on this, that they're not particularly conservative themselves. And I said not everybody is going to stick with him. And I know that Jim here is calling to say that he's one of these people that if Trump abandons conservatism and starts blaming everything on the Freedom Caucus, I'm out of here. That's what you're saying, essentially, Jim. You'll abandon Trump if that's the direction he goes, right?
We're mad as hell, and we're not going to take this anymore either. He's our hope to get the country out of the muddle it's been in after the Obama disaster. And he better not go wobbly, otherwise I am out of here. There's no point of hanging around for having...
Right, well, now, he's not going to look at it as going wobbly. The way he's trying to present it is he wants to make America great again, and these stupid conservatives are hanging around it his way. That's what his tweet was today. His tweet was that the conservative caucus is the reason that health care failed, and if they keep this up, he's going to abandon them. And then the stories are all over that he's thinking about reaching out to the Democrats if he can't trust the Republicans, the conservatives in the House. If he has to reach out to Democrats to get things done, he will. And I know what you're saying. You're not one of those voters that's going to hang with Trump no matter what he does. I get that. And I didn't say that every Trump voter would hang with Trump in this circumstance. But some of them will, folks. I'm just telling you that some people voted for the first time in a long time for Trump, and they've had plenty of chances to vote for conservatives in the past, and they didn't. They've not voted in a while. And they believe in Trump. That's why they voted. I don't know what the percentage is. I don't know how many of Trump's voters are ardent conservatives who are going to be offended by this. But it's a sizable number. It's not a number he can afford to lose. Let me put it that way. So, no, I understand, Jim, where you're coming from. Okay, let's see. We've got some good stuff. A university, where's this university? Loyola in Chicago is getting ready to offer safe spaces where white students can gather to talk about how racist they are. Yeah, hang on. Your guiding light, America's truth detector and doctor of democracy, general all-round good guy, Rush Limbaugh, here at the distinguished Limbaugh Institute for Anti-Leftist Studies. Here is Ken in Fredericksburg, Virginia. Great to have you on the program, sir. Hi.
Rush, my goodness gracious, I was telling Mr. Snerdley that I've been trying to reach you since you turned me from a Democrat into a Republican under Ronald Reagan. I was voted for Jimmy Carter. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, I voted for Jimmy Carter in the first election, couldn't stand it after about a year, and I was in charge of baseball up on New England on Cape Cod, and a friend of mine up there told me about you. I didn't even know anything about your radio station, and I started
wait. What is being in charge of baseball in?
Well, I was a general manager in Cape Cod League baseball.
Oh.
Yeah, okay. And we were the #1 recruiting league for the professionals in the entire country.
I got you.
Yeah, in fact, I'm in a book now called Baseball by the Beach. At least my name is. But anyway, brother, I got to tell you something. I'm so pleased with you, and I'm so proud of you. I'm happy that I got, finally, all these years, my fingers are getting numb. I went through 2 phones trying to reach you. Anyway, everybody's treating this situation with the president like they've lost their child. When the Democrats told their own people, Rush, that they would put people up against them in the midterm election if they voted for anything for Trump, that they would put horrendous amounts of money against their own people. And now and no one reported, no one cared. Now that Trump said something in the same direction as that they're treating it like, my God, can you believe someone would ever say anything like that? And especially Republicans going after the president. I mean, I believe these are all Democrats acting like they're Republicans when they call you on the phone and beat up on Donald Trump. I'm for the president. I'm backing him 100% on this. He's right to the conservative group, which I am a conservative, but...
You think the Freedom Caucus is to blame for the health care going down, and you support Trump in this quest to bring him back on board?
Yes, sir. I do, in fact. Because the president has got a tough row to hoe here. I mean, he puts a bill forward, and he gets his own people, meaning the Republicans, to work on it. Well, they can't even get together, so the president is out there on the limb by himself. The Democrats refuse to even cooperate in any way, form, or fashion with him, and the American people are turning against him.
This is what I meant, folks, in the first hour. This is the exact type of voter I'm talking about when I mentioned this.
Yes.
Okay, Ken, congratulations. I'm glad you got through, and I appreciate that backstory. I really do.
Yeah, there's more to it, but I know I don't have time. But, Rush, I thank you very much. My wife and I both became Republicans because of you, and I mean that sincerely. And I also even was the campaign manager for Ronald Reagan in all of southeastern Massachusetts in the second election.
Wow, you've done a lot. You've been in charge of Cape Cod baseball. You were Reagan.
Yeah.
Campaign. That's former Democrat. I mean, you've done it all.
Well, I retired out of the Marine Corps. I served in the Air Force, the Army, and the Marines, and retired out of the Marine Corps. So I've touched pretty much everything. So
did you see combat as a Marine?
Yes, at Quang Province, Vietnam. Sure
Vietnam.
did.
That's what I was going to guess. All right. Ken, thank you so much. So there you go. This is exactly what I think. He thinks the guy that just called is a Democrat setup. He thinks, was it a guy or was it a woman that just called? I thought it was Kate. Right. We had a woman who called, look, if Trump keeps bashing the Freedom Caucus of conservatives, I'm out. And then a guy called and said the same thing. If Trump keeps bashing them, look, Trump was not my first choice. He was the last choice. It was the only choice we have. We're going to vote for Hillary. If he abandons conservatism, out of there. So this guy, Ken, comes along and says, doesn't matter to me. The Republicans need to get on board with Trump. The last thing we need is the Democrats joining with Republicans or vice versa. So that's why I took those 2 calls back to back to illustrate the point. What do we have next? Rob in Dallas. You're next here on the EIB Network. Hello.
It's first time talking with you, Rush. It's a pleasure, and thank you.
You bet. Great to have you.
Firstly, I want to state that candidate Trump was the only Republican that could have won the general election. The Freedom Caucus are attempting to save his presidency and the future 2020 run. I know that Trump is fiscally social on health care.
No, whoa. I want to make sure I'm hearing this right. The Freedom Caucus are attempting to save his presidency by stopping that health care bill.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Paul Ryan will hang this bill around Republicans like an albatross. This alliance that Trump is attempting to make with the globalist, neocon, ventriloquist, war hawk faction of the Republican Party will destroy his presidency, and it is in complete contradiction to draining the swamp and deconstructing the administrative state.
Yeah, well, this is why I have always cautioned people to understand that Trump is not ideological. I don't think he sees it that way, but he might. But I don't think he does, even though you wish he did.
I hope that what he's doing is politicking to have the House.
Well, what he's done is he's joined Ryan. What he's done is he's exempting Ryan from any blame or responsibility for the Hill bill going down. Now he's zeroing in on the Freedom Caucus.
That's the public perception.
Oh.
But could he be setting up Congress to do its own job to take Paul Ryan out? Now, that's a hope. That's a dream. Because I think he is destroying his future presidency.
How in the world, I'm just trying to fit this into the mold here that you've made. How does blaming the Freedom Caucus, even if you're just doing it publicly, you don't mean it, how is the perception of Trump blaming the conservatives for his legislative failure and sidling up with Ryan and unifying with Ryan, how does that get rid of Ryan?
Okay, the only reason I say that, Rush, and the outward outlook is certainly nothing to that extent, but what has been reported throughout this entire process that has been accurate?
Tell me.
That truly gets to the undertones of what he's doing. Now, I don't see it that way. That's a hope. That's a dream. Because I think he's destroying the relationships that got him into office. And that's conservatives.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, and a lot of...
Did I make my point?
Yeah. You did fine. Yeah, okay. And a lot of conservatives are going to see it that way. And there's going to be myriad factions of conservatives. You're going to have the "see, I told you so, never Trump" conservatives who are salivating over this. I told you you couldn't trust the guy. I told you he wasn't. I told you the first chance he got, he's going to sidle up with those New York lib buddies of his. We're going to hear that. And then we're going to hear conservatives saying, it's just unfortunate. I know his instincts are the right way, and I want to stick with Trump, and I wish these Freedom Caucus guys would back off a little. And you're going to hear, I don't know how many different versions of conservative upset or outright anger at this. But look, let me find the tweet here again. In his tweet today, Trump warned the Freedom Caucus would hurt the entire Republican agenda if they don't get on the team and fast. He grouped its members, all of them Republicans, with Democrats in calling for their political defeat, an extraordinary incitement of intra-party combat from a sitting president. And that's the Washington Post. And that's the Washington Post analysis. I am just reading to you, focusing on the tweet. And the way I read it is they've got one more chance. If they don't get on the team and fast. That means whatever the next legislative movement is, be it reviving Obamacare, the repeal, or infrastructure or tax reform. If the Freedom Caucus pulls this same stunt, then Trump's finished with them and is going to go join the Democrats, reach out to the Democrats. And I think I predicted that last week. I know I did. Because Trump, above all else, wants not only to be able to say that he got things done, he wants to get things done. This bill, this health care bill, let me find this Philip Klein piece, folks. I don't even want to paraphrase this. I want to read this thing to you. Headline, GOP cave on Obamacare repeal is the biggest broken promise in political history. Philip Klein at the Washington Examiner. I don't think it's fair to scapegoat the Freedom Caucus people here. They're being blamed for making the naive mistake of assuming the Republicans wanted to do what they were promising to do for 7 years. It's like I told Snerdley this morning. You know what? You can really set all this aside. and look at the lay of the land. And we've been hearing for 7 years, repeal and replace Obamacare. There have been any number of bills the Republicans have passed set up to Obama. Some of them got there and he vetoed. But after all of this huffing and puffing, and after all of this back and forth, after all this negotiating, we still have Obamacare. Look, it's easy to say after the fact, and I think I've said this before the fact. I think I've said it. I've had my doubts the Republicans ever really wanted to get rid of this. It's an entitlement. They don't like taking entitlements. It's Santa Claus. You know, you don't want to cancel Christmas. That's how they look at this stuff in many ways. But Klein's point is here, it's clear to him that the Republicans at large didn't want this, and to be blaming the Freedom Caucus for it is a cop-out. Because he hasn't seen any other Republicans really trying to get this done. He said this bill was an embarrassment. This bill expanded certain things in Obamacare. It clearly didn't repeal anything. They've had 7 years to plan for this day. They've raised money on this whole possibility here. They have made promise after promise after promise, and Philip Klein thinks this is the biggest broken promise in political history. House conservatives, if they could be blamed for anything, it's for having the audacity to urge House leadership to actually honor 7 years of promises to voters to repeal Obamacare. What he's saying is the only people that really took this seriously is the Freedom Caucus. In other words, the Freedom Caucus says, oh, you want to repeal and replace Obamacare? Okay, good. Well, here's what we support. Here's how we're going to do it. And they did. And it turned out to be nothing like what they thought it was going to be, because it didn't repeal anything and it didn't replace anything. It left intact a lot of Obamacare and relied on the Health and Human Services Secretary Tom Price to start taking things out of it, which they said could get put back in the next time a Democrat wins. Let's put this in the bill to take these Obama regulations out. House leadership said, no, can't do it. So his point is the only mistake the Freedom Caucus made was taking seriously the claims from other Republicans they wanted to get rid of it. In Klein's view, he hasn't seen any real evidence they really want to get rid of it. They want a legislative win, but he thinks they're getting a raw deal. There's much more to this, too, but I have to take an obscene profit timeout right now. But we'll be back and wrap this in a minute. Yes, I know. I need to point out that Philip Klein, whom I'm quoting here from the Washington Examiner, is a never-Trumper emeritus. He's a former never-Trumper. He's a current never-Trumper. He's a never-ending never-Trumper. He's a never-Trumper forever. He's a proud and happy never-Trumper. So get that out there. But he's still defending the Freedom Caucus here. And just to repeat, he thinks if they need to be blamed for anything, it's for having the audacity to believe the Republican leadership actually wanted to repeal Obamacare. So they came up with ways to do it. And we're talking about Mark Meadows and our buddy Louis Gohmert. And it is Klein's opinion here that the leadership didn't really want to get rid of this. They didn't want to tackle it. They didn't want to get their arms and hands dirty. They just wanted to go through the motions. He said what's so utterly disgraceful is not just that the Republicans failed so miserably, but that they barely even tried, which raises questions about whether they ever actually wanted to repeal Obamacare in the first place. Here's the bottom line. Philip Klein, never-Trumper forever. The Republicans didn't want to repeal Obamacare that badly. Sure, if the Supreme Court had done their job for them, then they would accept it. They'd be okay with Obamacare going away. But as you know, John Roberts saved it. When push came to shove, they weren't willing to put in the elbow grease. Failing to get the votes on one particular bill, that's one thing. But failing and then walking away on 7 years of promises is a pathetic abdication of duty. The Republican Party is a party without a purpose. Now, admittedly, he's ticked off because they nominated Trump, and he's a never-Trumper. But this isn't really about Trump. I mean, I would love to see the guy unload on Trump's role in this, but he's defending the Freedom Caucus here against an unfair assault when all they did was actually believe that everybody meant get rid of this. That's what they did. and that's what was rejected. And now they're being threatened. Better get on board the next time, or else I'm going to the Democrats. I got to play this soundbite for you here before we hit the break. This is this morning in Arangst, Russia. The International Arctic Forum, CNBC Europe, has a reporter there. His name is Jeff Cutmore, and he got a sit-down with Putin at the International Arctic Forum. Now, I want you to listen to the laughter here. The question is, Mr. President, I just want to be very clear. You and the Russian government never tried to influence the outcome of the presidential election, and there'll never be any evidence found. Here's the answer.
Ronald Reagan once, debating about taxes and addressing the Americans, said, "No, watch my lips." He said, "No, watch my lips, no."
They're laughing themselves silly over there at the premise. Now, Putin got it wrong. It wasn't Reagan that said, "Watch my lips, no." It was Bush 41. Said, "Read my lips, no new taxes." But Putin's answer, if you couldn't hear it through all the mishmash there, Ronald Reagan once debating about taxes and addressing the Americans said, "Watch my lips, no. Watch my lips, no." And they're laughing themselves silly. No, we didn't influence the election. No, we didn't. They're laughing themselves crazy over it. I got to take a break, folks. We are coming back. Sit tight. So let me ask a simple question. We hear all of this talk about the Russians interfering in the election and tampering with the election, and we know that they didn't, because we know that they couldn't. How many of you are, besides, how many of you would be bothered by it? I mean, just based on what we know, that the Russians tried this, how many of you think it's this big a deal? Seriously, how many of you think it's this big a deal? The Democrats have turned everything they believe in over to this one thing. Yeah, I want you to keep soundbite number 21 standing by. That's Evelyn Farkas. You know, this is astounding. It is beyond blockbuster. It's beyond nailing these people, and it's not even news anywhere. Well, outside those of us who engage in finding the truth. Greetings, my friends, and welcome back. Rush Limbaugh, the Rush Limbaugh program, on over 600 great radio stations all across the fruited plain. 800-282-2882 if you want to be on the program. I mentioned just in passing, right before the end of a segment, that the Twitter storm erupted last night when it was learned the details of the marriage, Mike Pence and his wife Karen. And leftists are appalled that Pence does not eat in public with women without his wife along. They're outraged at this. You should have seen the Twitter storm. He does not attend events with alcohol without her at his side. Now, let me ask a question. If some leftists had a very, very open marriage, well, let's look at the Obamas. Do you know where Barack Hussein O is right now? He is on a deserted island in Tahiti for a month with 54 men. It's the old Marlon Brando estate. Marlon Brando had an island. He was first interviewed from that island by Larry King alive. And he's been there like a month. He's scheduled to be there a month. We haven't heard a word about Michelle Obama, but there isn't any Twitter storm over this. What if a different leftist couple went public with the details of their open marriage? About how each partner sleeps with other people, but they trust each other and they have great times together and they raise their kids. It would be celebrated. It would be applauded. The left would think that it's a great example of openness and trust and tolerance. But the liberals on Twitter were beside themselves last night when they found out that Pence will not eat in public with women without his wife along. Well, let's look at the opposite of that. Let's say one night, pick your spot. Let's say at the old Ebbett Grill. Or no, let the Capitol Hill Grill. Let's say one night Mike Pence is in there having dinner with another woman, not his wife, and somebody in the media sees it, maybe snaps a picture. Do you think there might be stories intimating something not right there? Think somebody would take notice and think it was odd? Could very well be. Nor does he attend events with alcohol without her. She is his prayer partner. They're really lambasting that. And he doesn't go anywhere with alcohol without her. It sounds to me like you got a couple of really good friends here who protect each other and who do everything they can to protect their marriage. You know, I was mentioning this the first time, and I checked my email, and I got a few emails from women saying, not cool for a guy to go to dinner, a married guy with a different woman, just not cool. Right? Heads would wag, tongues would wag, heads would... Anyway, I found it interesting that the left went nuts, particularly feminazis. The feminazis on Twitter portrayed this as Mrs. Pence being a totally 100% subservient. Well, I don't know how you get that out of it, but they did. The Senate Intelligence Committee has begun its own poke into the whole Russian-Trump collusion election story. Fox News story, Russia is engaged in information warfare on American soil, and its interference in the 2016 presidential campaign is just one part of a strategy to undermine Western democracies that continues today, said the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, who happens to be Richard Burr from North Carolina. He said, unfortunately, you will learn that these efforts by Russia to discredit the United States and weaken the West are not new. These efforts are, in fact, at the heart of Russian and previously the Soviet Union intelligence efforts. That's right, this isn't any news. This is not news at all. Whether Putin is doing it, whether the Soviets did it, they did. Undermining what, in fact, I would suggest to you that call it Putin, call it the Russians, call it the Soviets, call it the communists, whatever it is. The undermining of American democracy is happening at full speed on American college campuses. And that happened to be one of the primary efforts of the Soviet Union, was to undermine and infiltrate all aspects of American life, to undermine religion, to undermine and take control over education. There's no doubt that they've done this. There's no doubt that they continue to do it. That this is being portrayed as something new and exclusive only to the arrival of Donald Trump on the scene is an insult to our intelligence, because this is ongoing. You know what you ought to do? You ought to go back and get some books by Nelson DeMille. Nelson DeMille had I'm going to have to find the name of this book. How many of you watch the TV show on FX called The Americans? Let me tell you what The Americans is about. It's said by some critics to be the best show on TV. I think that's a real stretch, but I still watch it. It's an intriguing show. It happens to be based in reality. Do any of you remember the name Anna Chapman from the last 5 years ago? A gorgeous, beautiful Russian spy living in New Jersey. She was unmasked as a spy, but she was here, looked American, sounded American, looked like she had American citizenship, but she was a Russian spy here to undermine whatever. I don't know what her mission was. And she was sent back to the Soviet Union, Russia. She was deported. Anyway, the Nelson DeMille book details what was a very famous Soviet operation. And this TV show, The Americans, is all about it. What happened was Soviets would recruit from their own population young men and women, and they would take them to training camps where they would literally learn to become American. These training camps were miniature American towns with a typical American Main Street, a typical American suburbia, a typical American mall experience. And these Soviet agents learned to totally drop their Russian accent. They learned English flawlessly. They were educated to get American jobs. They were spies. They came and they were dispatched, and they lived in suburban Washington. They lived all over the country. They had kids who ended up being American citizens because they were born here. Their neighbors never knew that they were Soviet spies. One of their big objectives was to actually get hired in the government bureaucracy, wherever they could, or to recruit other Soviet spies or Americans via blackmail or whatever to learn details of American military operations or what have you. We know that these types of agents existed. We know that they were deployed predominantly during the Reagan years. And that's what this TV show, The Americans, is all about. In fact, this show, The Americans, I've been watching it this season, and I've never seen this portrayed. This season happens to focus on the fact the Soviet Union cannot feed its own people, or could not. And we, in humanitarian and strategic ways, ended up selling wheat to the Soviet Union because they couldn't grow any of their own. Here's the problem, though. The Soviet Union had a perfect climate for growing wheat. They had everything that we have in terms of natural resources. But their system, communism/socialism, was dead on arrival. They could not grow food. They could not grow crops. They could not produce. They were a third world nation. The big department store in Moscow is called GUM, G-U-M. Americans would travel there and come back and say they didn't believe what they saw. Soviet grocery stores with nothing on the shelves. 4-week-old cold cuts in the butcher department. They could not believe what they were seeing. And this is portrayed accurately on this TV show. The fact that you can't find anything on the store shelves, either at grocery stores or department stores in Moscow. And one of the elements of this season on this program, they actually have a department in the KGB, and I'm not going to remember the exact name, but they sent people around to all of the grocery stores, making sure that no grocery store had anything more than anybody else. And if the person, the party member that ran a grocery store, say, had more tangerines than another store, they had a unit to investigate how that property of socialism ended up in that store as opposed to some other store. They put people in jail if they ran a store that had more food than any other store. They figured corruption was going on. And they couldn't have that. They couldn't have a series of state-run stores, and one of them was sufficiently stocked and none of the others were at all. So the people that ran the stores that operated well, they put in prison. And this is portrayed accurately. Now, I don't know about the other thing that's being portrayed here, and that is that powerful forces in the United States poisoned the wheat that was sold to Russia to wipe out the population. And the two agents that live in Arlington in this season of The Americans are tasked with finding out if the wheat is poisoned and by whom and where, which takes them to Oklahoma City and Topeka. And what's happening, here's what you would expect to happen. When I first heard about this is when I read the Nelson DeMille book about it. And the first question I had after this, and I called Nelson DeMille, I said, you must be an expert on this, you've written a great novel about it. I said, how are they able to keep control over these agents? Okay, they've grown up in the Soviet Union, which is just a hellhole. The Soviet Union had nothing. It was miserable. Louis Armstrong could not sing "What a Wonderful World" and have it be related to anything in reality in the Soviet Union. So I said to him, how in the world, after they've educated these agents and they've Americanized them, they send them to the United States, how do they avoid them defecting? Because it is obvious that the United States is robust and a land of plenty and abundance compared to where they've come from. And the answer I got was, they have been so fully brainwashed, Mr. Limbaugh, that these agents believe that what they see in America is fake. And that it's not like that if they were to leave the Washington area. If they were to travel to St. Louis, it would look just like Moscow. And they believed it. And in fact, the beginning of the end of the Soviet Union happened when bootleg copies of Dallas and what was the ABC show with John Forsythe and Dynasty, when reruns of Dynasty and Dallas, bootlegged editions, made it to the underground into the Soviet Union. That gave the lie. That exposed the lie that the Soviet leadership had told its people for decades, that life in the United States was one of misery and prison camps. And it was only a matter of time before they imploded. Reagan knew it, imploded of their own immorality. But the idea that any of this is new and that it's exclusively tied to Trump and because of Trump is absurd. As I say, the Soviet Union has been attempting to undermine as much of American traditional values as it can. And I would submit to you that they have succeeded beyond their wildest dreams in American education. as I said, at Loyola University in Chicago, the university now offers safe spaces where white students can gather and talk about how racist they are. Loyola University Chicago's new campus club exclusively for self-identified white students. In the group, they get to admit their own racist feelings and whine about all the racism that they and their fellow white people are inflicting on the world. Called an affinity group, which is the new leftist term for a racially segregated group, the whites-only group is called Ramblers Analyzing Whiteness. In the group, members can examine what it means to be white. They can confess their guilt about their own internationalized racism, internalized racism, and they can begin the journey of operating in solidarity with others and begin to abandon their white privilege. Now, you tell me that the roots of this have anything to do with American values. Anyway, Richard Burr, the Republican chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, says the focus of the hearing is going to be on how the Kremlin allegedly used technology to spread disinformation in the U.S. and in Europe, that Vladimir Putin himself on Thursday dismissed what he called endless and groundless accusations of Russian meddling. Ranking Democrat member Mark Warner said that Putin ordered a deliberate campaign to undermine the U.S. election. He said that Russia engaged in a disinformation campaign that made effective use of its hacking skills to steal and weaponize information and engage in a coordinated effort to damage a particular candidate and to undermine public that is just flat-out BS. Folks, I'm telling you, it is flat-out BS. There is literally no way that could have led to the defeat of Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton was her own worst enemy. It didn't take any hacking of any computer to tell people what a worthless candidate she was, how unexciting she was. The Russians weren't behind the fact nobody bought her book. The Russians weren't behind the fact that nobody showed up at her book signings. The Russians weren't behind the fact that nobody showed up at her campaign appearances. The Russians weren't behind the fact that everybody showed up at Trump's. The Russians weren't behind any of that. Furthermore, if the Russians wanted a guaranteed outcome, they would have wanted Hillary to be president because she would have continued the weak, dismantling foreign policy of Barack Obama. Okay, this TV show, The Americans. Now, what's happening on this show, the husband and wife Soviet agent team, they live right across the street from an FBI agent who's clueless. And their daughter has found out who they are. And the one thing that bugs me about this show is they spend so much time on his daughter, who is about ready to have a nervous breakdown, and to me, it delays the advancement of the plot. But that's just me. In a recent episode, Philip and Elizabeth, the spies that live in Arlington, the Soviets, they go out to Oklahoma and Kansas on their mission to find out who, if anybody's poisoning the wheat to be sold to the Soviets. And Philip, he's wearing a wig with a cowboy hat as a disguise, and they're in the cab of a pickup truck, and he says, all this land out here, you know what this looks like? It looks like home. We have all this. Why can't we grow enough grain ourselves? And his wife, Elizabeth, says, well, everybody has problems. And she's, in denial. Philip is starting to see that their mission is a waste of time because the Soviet Union is not worth saving. And in fact, one of the characters in this season's episode is a former Soviet citizen who got out, lives in America, and hates the Soviet, and just keeps ripping it to them. And they have to keep their cover. And you can see that they get mad about it. He said, in Soviet Union, we have some great land, some great climate, but the system is broke. They still move food by horse sometime. And by the time it gets to where it's going, it's rotten. Soviet systems stink. And Philip and Elizabeth seethe with rage at the guy. Okay, ready for this? We're now talking about the Senate Intelligence Committee and its examination of the Russians tampering with the election. And remember, the chairman, Richard Burr, the Republican of North Carolina, has acknowledged the Russians try to tamper with everything. Western European democracies, ours, They hacked this, they hacked this. They're trying to spread disinformation. So time for a Democrat to speak up. It was Mark Warner, senator from, I believe, Virginia. And you know what he gave and cited as an example of Russian disinformation? Do you remember the video? It was July 4th last year. And Hillary Clinton was, I think, at Ground Zero at the new Freedom Tower. She had to leave early, and she stumbled and nearly fell to the curb, and they had to shove her in the back of that van face first. And it was patently obvious that she'd had a seizure or some such thing. Mark Warner cited that story as Russian disinformation when she had her seizure. That it happened, but all that happened was that she slipped. That it was Russian disinformation that spread the word that she'd had a seizure. Well, I know, we saw it. We saw the fact they had to have 3 people carry her out there, prop her up. She did nearly slip off the curb. She was zoned out. Something had happened. She had some kind of a seizure. We're making a big deal about it. But Mark Warner cites that as an example. All that happened was she slipped. There was nothing to see there. Russian disinformation created the story that she had a seizure. I mean, you're just about scraping the bottom of the barrel. You know, as I said, folks, the idea that the Russians colluded, well, that's absurd. The idea the Russians hacked the election, it's absurd. As though it's something new, something outrageous, something that we've never seen before, which is the picture they're trying to create with this. And it's a standard operating procedure, and we do it too. May I remind you, we do it out in the open. Barack Hussein Obama sent a campaign team to Israel to undermine the re-election of Bibi Netanyahu. We interfere in elections in foreign countries all over the place. Dick Cheney the other day said, if this Russians did this, this is an act of war. And so right on his tail, here comes Donna Brazile saying it's an act of war. Well, if that's true, then we have engaged in acts of war too, because we do it. Not only do we interfere in elections, we actually take out foreign leaders. Remember those days of CIA assassinations of Central American dictator thugs? Augusto Pinochet, that everybody supposedly hated. No. I'm not defending him. Folks, it isn't this big a deal. But to the low information crowd, the fact that the Russians tried to tamper with the election and were friends with Trump, they're trying to make this a much, much, much bigger deal than it is. And if they're trying to wear people out on it with me, it's beginning to work, because I'm getting fed up with this. The whole premise that the Russians colluded and somehow that's the only reason Trump won, they can't prove it. There isn't any evidence because that didn't happen. Here's Nan in Huntsville, Alabama. I'm glad that you waited. It's your turn. Hello.
Hey, Rush. How are you?
I'm fine and dandy, Nan. Thank you very much.
Hey, I'm super duper nervous to talk to you. Waiting on hold is a whole different experience than just listening to your show.
Thank you very much.
I just wanted to say that I appreciate what you've been saying about the Freedom Caucus. Mo Brooks is my representative, and I appreciated what he's doing by standing firm. And you have really said exactly what he's been saying. He's been on some local radio shows here and just talking about how much, more the new bill would have cost. It's really just a Republican welfare thing. And his deal is, why don't we just repeal it? And so I guess I just wanted to kind of I guess his point was he just wants the American people, if this is what we want, we need to get behind it.
Yeah, I understand. He also submitted, well, he's got a proposed piece of legislation that's one sentence that he needs a discharge petition to actually get it out and onto the floor, which probably won't happen. But he's got a one-sentence thing that essentially says this is to signify the repealing of Obamacare and all related regulations as of this date. Bam! Done! Over with. It is this whole episode is highly instructive. I mean, there's so many elements here. The attempt to marginalize conservatives, the dislike of conservatives throughout the Washington spectrum, not just on the Democrat side, but on the Republican side too. But more importantly, the idea that this repeal and replace bill wasn't going to do that. Now, the proponents, to be fair here, the proponents said, yeah, we know, but this is as much as we can get because of Senate rules. And the old fallback, well, we can't get 60 votes over there, so we have to use budget reconciliation, which is only requires 51 votes, much easier threshold, but we can't repeal all of it with that. So the things that are going to be left over, then we're going to have Secretary Price pull out of there. Because the actual law, Obamacare, it's amazing how many times this reference appears in that law, as the Secretary shall determine. The power over American health care is invested in the Secretary of Health and Human Services, largely in the actual Obamacare bill. And so the Republican effort had phase two, which was Price yanking out all those regulations that Obama had implemented that have not been put in there by way of legislation. And then phase three was to sell insurance across state lines. And the Freedom Caucus said, we don't like this business that Price is just going to pull those things out of there. If we want that, why don't we put it in the bill? The point was that if we lose the election in 2020, then whoever the next Democrat president is can put them right back in. We need to pass legislation to keep those things out statutorily. And the proponents of the bill on the Republican side said, we can't get that passed. That will never fly. That'll never go through the Senate. We can't do it that way. You're going to have to trust us. We'll get to all of this in phase three. Freedom Caucus and others were highly suspicious of one thing, that after this bill was passed, and if it passed the Senate, and if Trump signed it, that would be it. That everybody would say, health care, we did it, man. We repealed and replaced Obamacare, and forget it and move on. There wouldn't be a phase two or phase three. And I think the conservative Freedom Caucus was probably right about that. Because the way this all played out, it was obvious that the objective was the achievement, not the substance. I think all these meetings that they had with Trump and with Ryan and whatever to sell it, I don't know this, but my best guess would be that the efforts to sell it were not based on the substance of the bill. In other words, you have a meeting with a Freedom Caucus where Mark Meadows and his guys in there, and I doubt they were told, look at how good this is. Look at this proposal. Look at that proposal. We got to get this done. Mark, get your guys behind. I don't think that happened. I think what they were told, we can't afford to lose this. Look, this is the first legislative effort this administration. We Republicans have to show unity. You've got to back this. Pretty sure that's what happened. And now we're treading old ground, but the Freedom Caucus people said, well, what? But this doesn't do anything. This is making it worse. But we need the bill, they were told. And we need to get started. Just give us this. This is better than nothing, they would say. Half a loaf is better than no loaf. We've got to get it done. And the Freedom Caucus balked. And I'm telling you, they were highly pressured. Their arms were twisted. There might have been some promises made, but they hung tough on this because of two things. They believed that everybody meant it when they promised all these years to repeal and replace Obamacare. So when the time came, that's what their efforts were aimed at. The second thing they did was to hold firm on it because that's why they got elected. And that obviously was not the objective of some others. So, in the meantime, we must take another obscene profit break and return right after it. I got a quick question for you. What is the easiest question in Washington to answer? Dun, 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 dun. What is the easiest question in Washington to answer? Actually, it's true anywhere, but we're focusing on Pence and his marriage and how he won't go out to dinner with a woman without his wife present and all that. What's the easiest question in Washington to answer? The one that cannot be asked. Don't roll your eyes. That's a profundity. The easiest question to answer is the one that can't be asked. Mr. Pence, what were you doing with your legislative aide last night at dinner? If you don't go to dinner with her, they can't ask the question. The easiest question to answer is the one that cannot be asked. Just another way of saying, keep it on the straight and narrow, and nobody can hound you. And you know where I got that? White comedian Paul Shanklin. It's one of the guiding principles of his life. Easier to answer the questions that cannot be asked. Titusville, Florida. This is Helen. It's great to have you on the program. How are you doing?
I'm good, Rush. Thank you for taking my call.
You bet.
I'm calling to tell you how outraged I am at these law enforcement people who are ignoring laws on immigration and not taking these people out of the country when they could help out INS and Border Patrol and the people that are there in place that can help them. It's when you join law enforcement, you take an oath to abide by the laws of the state and the federal government. And this woman that's out west, that's the sheriff, the high sheriff, that's ignoring this, and not to mention this twit that's up there in Massachusetts that calls the people and tells them to hide out because ICE is coming to look for them.
You mean, when you're talking about the woman, the high sheriff out west, you mean the chief judge in California, the California Supreme Court?
No, there's a sheriff they've been talking on Fox News about who is the sheriff, the high sheriff, and she ignores all the immigration laws.
Oh, okay. Well, I was going to say that, of course, is happening. A lot of that happened during the Obama administration. There's still some holdovers. That, of course, all of that you say is very true. But it's even worse than that now because, like this, the Chief Justice of the state of California is actually going to sue the federal government for enforcing federal law on sanctuary cities. They're actually preparing to sue the federal government for violating the law, for enforcing the law on sanctuary cities. Folks, this battle is encapsulated right in front of our faces, what the leftists of this country want, and they're clearly willing to break the law and then sue the law itself in order to be able to continue to break it. Just looking at one of these tweets in reaction to the Washington Post story on Pence refusing to eat with another woman in public without his wife being present, some MTV personality said, "That's worse than Sharia. That is so backwards. That's worse than what the Muslims do to women. That's such an insult to women." Go figure.